All right. So I wanted to do something a little bit different. A lot of people right now are doing like spoilers, reveals, or doing opinion videos on spoilers. And so we're going to do something kind of like that. But instead of going through this whole list of cards, we're only going to look at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 that I think have some potential of maybe finding room in a shadow deck somewhere, or cards that we're going to test out at some point on stream. So I wanted to go through these. We're not going to count things like Liliana the Veil, since they already exist in the format. We already know what they do. But the rest of these are all new cards that we might end up playing pretty shortly after the new set releases. But these are all just like options that either people have mentioned or cards that I thought looked interesting that might serve a purpose. We don't currently serve with any other card. And then there's going to be a few on here that people have asked about that I wanted to address and say like, hey, I don't think this is going to make it because XYZ, like some reason. So we're just going to like skim through, and I'll stop at all the cards that I found that I think are going to be on this list, or cards that I've mentioned. And yeah, we'll just like stop at each one and kind of go over it, and I'll explain my thoughts on it, and we'll move on from there. So some of the quick hits here that I don't think are going to make it are cards like Stronghold Arena. It's a Dark Confidant effect where if you hit your opponent with a creature, so I'll just read over it. Why not? So it's 1 in a black for an enchantment. Kicker, green and or white. So when it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life for each time it was kicked. So it's up to 4 mana, gain 6 life. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, you can reveal the top card of your library, put it into your hand. If you do, you lose life equal to its mana value. So the direct comparison is Dark Confidant. The flip over, lose life equal to its mana value part. But Confidant doesn't require you to hit your opponent. It can also just be played out as a threat itself. So Confidant can kill your opponent. Stronghold Arena cannot. And it means you have to have a creature already surviving and attacking, which in most Shadow decks means you're winning anyway, because if you have a threat that's living and attacking, you're probably doing fine. Again, if you just wanted like that effect, you could just play Dark Confidant. The upside is if you played out something like a Ragavan on turn 1, you could play this on turn 2, hit them, and draw a card. That's kind of cool, but it relies really heavily on having a 1-drop and having that 1-drop survive and be able to attack. And you got to play this pre-combat. So ultimately, I don't think it's going to cut it. Second one over here, Herborg Lurgoy. The Tarmogoyf ripoff that bases its power and toughness on the number of creature cards in your yard instead of the number of card types in all yards. And then it's got kicker, blue and or black, and you mill 3 for each time it was kicked. Only checks your yard, doesn't check your opponent. So I think more often than not, this is going to come down as like a 2-3, maybe late game you get it up to like a 4 or 5, but that's assuming your opponent doesn't interact with your graveyard at all. It's never going to be the beater that Tarmogoyf is on turn 2 or 3. As of right now, there's not a shadow strategy that like really utilizes milling out yourself or getting an extensive amount of cards in your graveyard quickly. So I think this is going to miss the ticket. All right, so let's keep scrolling down. Most of these are pretty dull. Oh, Leyline Binding. One I definitely want to talk about. So personally, I think this is like one of the best cards in the set for slotting into existing archetypes or being fairly easy to adjust to. So for Leyline Binding, it's 5 and a white for a flash enchantment. It's got Domain. It costs 1 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. So if you control all 5 land types, it's 1 mana for a flash enchantment. ETB, exile target non-land permanent and opponent controls until Leyline Binding leaves the battlefield. So for 1 white in like a domain or a 5 colors deck, flash enchantment, exile a non-land permanent until it leaves. Fantastic. Like if you're playing a domain deck already, like a domain zoo, domain shadow deck, it slots right in. If you're playing like a, unfortunately, 5 color Omnath deck, it could probably slot in pretty easily. But from the shadow side, like the obvious comparison would be Prismatic Ending. But when you get to add Prismatic Ending with instant speed, and there's not a lot of good ways to deal with a 6 mana enchantment since your opponent can't Prismatic Ending or like Portable Hole it back. A lot of times you're just going to have a 1 mana flash, exile a non-land permanent. And that is pretty solid. So I think if you're playing like a 4 or 5 color shadow deck, you look at this in that Prismatic Ending slot and just kind of decide like how likely do you think this is going to be 1 mana get the effect. Because if you're talking about like Prismatic Ending being worlds better on turn 1 situationally, this has the potential of being better from like turn 2 onward. Because the way I look at it is I could like fetch shock a Godless Shrine on 1 and then fetch up a Triome on 2, and this is 1 mana exile a non-land permanent. So if you think that's something you can reasonably do in a shadow deck, it's more often going to be like 2 mana exile a non-land permanent on turn 2. If you go like Godless Shrine into Steam Vents or something like that, usually not playing Temple Garden. But if you do end up playing like a domain style zoo deck and play a Triome or 2, then that gets exponentially better. Nothing here. Raven Man was one I wanted to at least bring up. 1 in a black, 2/1. Beginning of each instep. If a player discarded a card this turn, create a 1/1 black bird creature token flying. So it's kind of got that young pyromancer type feel to it. Like, all right, something happened, make a 1/1. Happened again, make a 1/1. So curving like Raven Man into Liliana of the Veil could be extremely nice. Raven Man into Kolaghan's Command, Kroxa, Kick Turok, Thoughtseize, Inquisition. Like any of those things can potentially get you a few bird tokens stacking up and attacking. Ultimately, I think that like Young Pyromancer is more consistent for that effect, since you can cast like your cantrips, removal spells, and get that 1/1 token where this is specifically opponent discarding. But I figured I would at least bring it up. Rada's Firebrand's kind of cool. It's like a 3/1 that something smaller than it can't block, and then you can pay effectively 1 red if you're in a domain deck and make it a 5/3. But overall, I think most of these like 2 mana domain cards are just worse than Territorial Kavu. So I think if you're in a domain deck, 5 color shadow deck, something like that, or you're already playing domain cards, I think Territorial Kavu is going to be just like your better choice in that slot. Evolved Sleeper is one I wanted to bring up, because it could potentially slide into like your Esper or your Mardu Shadow deck if you're running Ranger Captain of Eos, or what's the other one? Ranger of Eos or Ranger Captain of Eos, one of those cards. Then this could be like a 1 mana level up guy, kind of like Figure of Destiny. But the upside is once you get up to that 3rd level, which it's 4 mana to get it to a 3/3, that you can just pay 3 mana, lose a life, draw a card. And you can do that over and over and over and over again, and put a 1/1 counter on it. So It's like a pretty decent mana sink if you get to where that's something you want to do. So you're talking like turn 3 Ranger Captain, turn 4 Evolve Sleeper, level him up all the way, turn 5 make him a 4/4, draw a card, lose a life, hold up 2 mana, something like that. But that's also 5 mana drawn, which is a lot. But at least wanted to bring up the card. Founding of the Third Path, I think, is one that has been a little uh, underappreciated on my radar. So I'm thinking of this in like your expressive iteration, Drown in the Lock style shadow deck. If you've got 2 mana, cast a 1 or 2 mana instant or sorcery from your hand without paying its mana cost when it enters. That's first chapter. Then that could just be like ETB, play a expressive iteration from hand, kill something with a Drown in the Lock, hand disruption, whatever. And then the second chapter, target player mills 4 cards. You can mill them to turn on Drown in the Lock. You can mill yourself to try to hit some more instants or sorceries for chapter 3, which is just exile instant or sorcery from your yard, copy it. So you could copy an expressive iteration from your yard, hand disruption again, Thoughtseize Inquisition, a removal spell like a lightning bolt, unholy heat. But I think your best case would be copy like an expressive iteration. Has the advantage of being an enchantment for like Goyf style shadow decks, your 4-color builds and things like that. So just one to keep an eye on. I don't think it's better than just playing an actual spell in that slot, but I think the effect is reasonable and free enough that if you're playing enough like really impactful tap out 2 mana spells like expressive iteration, then this could slot in and kind of just help you double up on some of those without having to really take a turn off. Let's keep going down. Bunch of boring stuff. Battlewing Mystic was interesting. It's essentially Seasoned Pyromancer mana at 1 blue and then the red for kicker. And then it's a 2/1 flyer, so it's got some evasion. But ETB, kick it, discard your hand, draw 2 cards. So a top deck one of these is phenomenal, but any other time Seasoned Pyromancer is probably just going to be better. And since Pyromancer makes the bodies, a lot of the times it can help out with just clocking your opponent. But again, just thought I would at least bring it up if somebody saw better use. Choking Miasma, another like Flaying Tendrils, Drown in Sorrow type effect. But the upside is you have this chance at kicker. So you can pay 4 mana instead of 3, get the kicker to put a 1/1 counter on a dude you control. So I think if you're playing like Drown in Sorrow, Flaying Tendrils, this might be a consideration if you're in like a Jund Shadow, 4-color Shadow, something like that, and you want that small sweeper effect. This at least has like some upside to clocking your opponent. Drown in Sorrow, though, is really nice with the exile. Or no, Drown in Sorrow is the scry too. Flaying Tendrils is the exile. So Flaying Tendrils is really nice if you're looking for that effect, just to be able to hit things like the little undying creatures against Yawgmoth and stuff like that. So I think if you're wanting that, I would play Flaying Tendrils. But if you're looking for Flaying Tendrils with like little clock potential, Miasma could be an option. Terra Sunder is one we've been asked about a lot. So 1 and a green, exile target artifact or enchantment, and then 1 black kicker. If this spell was kicked, exile target non-land permanent instead. So an interesting thing about this card is if you kick it, you can hit like a Teferi, Wandering Emperor, Leyline Binding, or you can hit a Leyline Binding anyway. Teferi, Wandering Emperor, any annoying creature, stuff like that for 4 mana, which is a little high, but so be it. But for one green or one in a green, you could hit an Urza Saga. So you could bring this in against your Urza Saga opponents, have the chance to hit the Urza Saga on 2. If they don't have the Saga, then maybe you get to turn 4, and now you got this 4-mana instant speed, exile, whatever. And so there's like some flexibility there. Personally, I would rather just play Assassin's Trophy or Abrupt Decay if you're looking for something in that spot. I've seen people play Witherbloom Command. I think ultimately, like, the 2 mana to deal with most anything instead of 4 is going to be a pretty big deal. But that at least has a kicker option that could help it a little bit. Tail Swipe if you're wanting a fight effect, but I don't think that's really where you want to be. Especially when you have cards like Fatal Push that can just kill something straight up, or like Unholy Heat, Run Afoul if you're wanting to kill Murktides. Is there anything over here? No. Cut Down's a removal spell people have asked about. So one of the things that nobody really paid much attention to when the fourth card first got spoiled was it says destroy target creature with total power and toughness. Power and toughness, 5 or less. So you add the power and toughness together, and if that number is 5 or less, you can kill it. If it's not, it lives. If it was just like destroyed target creature with power or toughness 5 or less, card would be an immediate slot in, like in a ton of shadow lists. But it doesn't. It says power and toughness, so like you can't even kill opposing shadows or goyfs or anything like that. You're never touching a Murktide with it. You can't kill a Dragon's Rage Channeler with Delirium. Dodges it. What's his name? Ledger Shredder with 1 counter dodges it. Totally not worth. Neshoba Brawler, another one of these 2 mana domain cards. It's just worse than Territorial Kavu. Dies to Lightning Bolt. It does gain Trample, which is kind of okay. But 5/3 in Modern, die to Bolt. And I'm not really saying no because of the die to Bolt argument, because like Ragavan, Dragon's Rage Channeler, these cards die to Bolt. But Neshoba Brawler at 2 that like doesn't do anything ETB, and the upside is just that it has Trample. When Territorial Kavu is going to be the same power, higher toughness, more useful ability. Just run Kavu. Alright, none of these were interesting. None of these. Nope. Nope. Alright, this was a fun row. So the 2 here are like all of these can get cheaper, and so they're at least worth mentioning. Like once you start adding these like Delve domain style cost reductions, it's at least worth looking at them. The Argivian Phalanx, 5 and a white, 4/4, 1 less for each creature you control. I don't think we run nearly enough creatures for this. Best case scenario, it's going to be like 3 mana for a 4/4 Vigilance. Tolarian Terror, I actually really like. So it's 6 and a blue, costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery in your graveyard, and it's got Ward 2. The Ward 2 part is like phenomenal here. Like it runs into the same issue as Gurmag Angler of being dead to dedicated grave hates, like Rest in Peace, Relic of Progenitus, Nihil Spellbomb, Leyline of the Void, anything like that. So if you're running Gurmag, you've got that side-by-side comparison. This is better in multiples since you can play out the second one with the cost reduction without having to exile your yard. It's worse on like turn 2 or 3 because you can't exile Street Wraiths and Mishra's Baubles and stuff like that to help pay for it. But if you're just in like a Spell Slinger Shadow build, then I think this could have potential. And then the Ward 2 I think is very, very underrated. So it means that your opponent can't like play out their Teferi on turn 3 and bounce it, or their Jace on 4, their big Teferi on 5, and just like bounce it back. It means that your opponent's like Solitude is going to cost 2 extra mana. So maybe they can't just hard cast it. Maybe they can't hold up and evoke Solitude and play something else. It means that their Unholy Heat's now a 3 mana removal spell, which is much more manageable, assuming you're playing this alongside like Stubborn Denial, Drown in the Lock, whatever. So I think that's one to, if you're playing Gurmag Angler, I would consider looking at Tolarian Terror and just swapping out like Street Wraiths and Mishra's Baubles for Considers or something along that line, just to enable it a little bit better. Writhing Necromass, 1 less for each creature in your graveyard, probably unplayable. Like, instant and sorcery is way easier to enable than creatures. But maybe if you're playing like Living End and you just want like a beater card in there, that could be okay. Molten Monstrosity is another one that I thought could potentially be a little interesting. So you like play out a decent sized Shadow or Tarmogoyf if you got a really cheap Monstrosity. It costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. I don't think it's going to see a place ultimately, but if you're just talking about wanting like another good size beater with not that difficult of a restriction to pull off, this could be it. Has the added benefit of, if you say play out a 7/7 Shadow, you don't give your opponent a priority opportunity. You can just immediately play this afterwards. So even if they do have a kill spell for the Shadow, you still get this for the cost reduction. And then if you get one of these down, it cheapens the next one by 5. And then the last one's this Tree Folk that costs 1 less to cast for each basic land type you control. If it was 5 in a green instead of 7 in a green, I would be interested in maybe trying this out. Like 1 mana for a 4/6 isn't the worst. Say it's not the worst, like that's not above rate. But 3 mana for a 4/6 is unplayable as far as Shadow is concerned. Let's see any of these. Shadow Prophecy is an interesting one. So 2 and a black for an instant. Domain, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put up to 2 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You lose 2 life. So if you're playing a 4-color Shadow deck or a Domain Shadow, something like that, then this could be a 3 mana instant. Look at the top 4 or 5 cards of your library. Put 2 of them into your hand and everything else goes in the graveyard. So your 4-color list with like Tarmogoyf, this could be an upgrade over something like what's it called? Painful Truths. Just to be able to like not only grow your Tarmogoyf, grow your Shadow, get some sort of card advantage, because it is a 2-for-1. But just worth looking into. There was a period where we played I think it's called Worldly Council in 4-color. Worldly Council. Shout out to Bench Summer for this fantastic tech. So, Worldly Council is 1 and a blue for an instant. Look at the top X cards, where the X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put 1 into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library. So this is like 1 more mana for Worldly Council. Keeps the instant. Keeps the number of cards you look at. But you get 2 cards instead of 1. So, nice to see that. Nothing really here. Nothing. Nope. Nope. Impulse is a cool one to print into Modern. Hasn't had a Modern printing before. So for anybody that doesn't know, Impulse, 1 in a blue for an instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand, the rest on the bottom of your library. So it's like Anticipate, but you get to see 1 card deeper, which is really probably find room in like a Storm deck for this. maybe if you're on like a spell-based blue-black shadow deck, you could potentially want this. It's not really my first choice. I'd rather have like Knight's Whisper more often than not. But the instant speed is relevant. And whereas like what's it called? The blue-black one now, Tainted Indulgence, you get to draw 2 and then discard 1. This is just looking at the top 4 and putting 1. So it's the same in terms of card advantage, where it just nets neutral, but you get to see 2 more cards on this one. Let's see. Not much going on over here. Was there anything out of the gold cards? I don't think there was. There were like some cool cards for non-shadow decks. Like I really like Shauna Purifying Blade. But as far as for shadow specifically, there's not much. Maybe if you're like a Grixis Prowessy shadow build, Balmor Battle Mage Captain is interesting. It's a 1/3 for 2 that whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, all of your creatures get +1/+0 and trample. So if you're running like Swift Spear, Shadow, this, Sprite Dragon, something like that, then it could be an interesting one. But everything else is pretty subpar. Like Lagomos Hand of Hatred here was interesting. I just get to make like a 2/1 every turn with Trample and Haste. Then you can tutor up a card if 5 or more creatures died. So maybe if you're like in a heavy Young Pyromancer, Seasoned Pyromancer build, like a Rakdos, really go wide token build, or like a Mardu go wide token build with Lingering Souls, then that could be something you were interested in. But you need like sack effects and token producers and all that, and I think that's too much for a shadow deck to overcome. Artifacts. Not really anything like, yeah. This is the new Karn's like one of the worst planeswalkers that's ever been printed. But I think that's it for the most part. The basic land type, common dual lands is interesting. None of them go in shadow since they can't come into play untapped ever, but they're at least a cool design space. So yeah, that's about everything from the set. I think we went over. I guess the only other one was Temporary Lockdown. This card, if nobody's seen it, it's 1 and 2 white for an enchantment. ETB, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until it leaves the battlefield. So if you're playing like Mardu, Esper, or something like that, or Zov, and you're just looking for like a I win the game type effect against Hammer Time, this could be something worth looking into. Can also deal with Rhino tokens. You've got the negative side of you can't do anything before this hits the battlefield, but at least it's something to know that you have access to if you're not already running like Hidetsugu. But this does hit the 2 mana stuff, so like Sanctifier on Vec, Pure Steel Paladin, Stoneforge Mystic, Reality Chip, all those, it hits. So keep that in mind. Also doesn't get stopped by Pithing Needle and exiles their Pithing Needle. So somewhere in there it could be playable. But yeah, for the most part, cards like the Leyline Binding, the Domain Enchantment that exiles an on-land permanent, Temporary Lockdown there, Tolarian Terror, the 6 blue, 5/5 with Ward 2 that gets cheaper for your instant sorceries, are the cards that I'm a little more interested in checking out. But I think any of those cards that I mentioned, you could throw together some sort of a reasonable argument to test them out. And obviously over on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/the_control freak, we'll try them out at some point. But that was just a list of cards that I thought were interesting, had some potential, did something unique that I wanted to briefly go over. But we'll talk about them more on stream. We'll talk about them as the set releases and some of these cards start getting played. So, yeah, if there's anything else, any other cards that you're really interested in, if you notice something I didn't notice, then feel free to drop a comment down below. Let me know what you saw. Let me know what you're thinking, what you want to see played, and we'll try our best to make it happen. So, hope everybody has an awesome rest of their day. Stay safe. Enjoy some good food and company. We'll catch y'all live soon.